All right, Frank, how you doing today? We're in.
All right, good. I'm doing great. It's hot as Hades out there, man. Oh man, it's nice and cool in here, so I appreciate.
We're lucky. We're lucky. We got one of the air conditioners that doesn't mess too much with the audio system.
Yeah.
So, or else it would be impossible to record in the summer, I think, wouldn't it?
Oh my God, yeah. Believe me, I've shot on sound stages in the middle of summer where you have to turn off the AC if you're going to be filming because for the same reason it's going to mess with the audio and the minute that AC would go off, man, the temperature would just rise like so fast.
Yeah.
Everybody would be like, quick, let's get on to the next shots so we can get the AC back on.
Must be just miserable some days.
Some days.
So I'm very interested. I'm so glad you came to chat with me. It's not very often that, we do things as kids and then we end up getting to do them in real life as professionals in the movies. So I'd like to just, learn a little bit about where you are at the moment with your career, and then we'll take it back a little bit. So what is it that you're doing these days?
Most of the time, I work these days as a screenwriter. I was very recently a writer on the Creep Show television series, which is on Shudder, which is part of AMC. But I kind of stay busy by doing a bunch of different things. So when one thing maybe isn't working, maybe the other one is. So I'm also doing acting again, which I hadn't done for many years. So,
yeah, I think that's part of the LA survival guide is being able to do like 2 or 3 things at a high level.
I think it's imperative that you really need to not lock yourself into one thing because you never know when the rug might get pulled out from under you with that one thing. I've seen it happen. It happened at Disney Animation for me, which I probably talk about later. But yeah, no, I think it's absolutely. Whenever I go and I talk to like kids, I go back to like my college and gave some TED Talks or whatever you want to call them, and I always say to them, you guys, follow your bliss and do what you really, really love. But it doesn't hurt to have a backup plan, just in case.
And I think also too, and COVID I think has taught a lot of people this, and it definitely taught me this because my career was kind of sidetracked a little bit, and finally now it's starting to come back. But embrace the pivot. I think that if things are not going your way in one direction, that you do have to make a change and accept it and be willing to make that change instead of sitting around twiddling your thumbs and expecting.
I really like that actually. Embrace the pivot. I'm going to steal that now, just so you know.
It's important because especially with technology, like technology is changing so fast that if you did something and now technology does it better, that's never coming back. So if you don't pivot, you're just not going to work anymore.
Yeah. And that also refers to the Disney situation. The technology changed. And suddenly a lot of people who had not, who had basically their whole lives been drawing with a pencil in their hand, suddenly that was obsolete. And it was a really frightening wake-up call to a lot of people.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you've referenced Disney Animation twice now. So let's get into this. So where are you from originally?
I am originally from Long Island in New York. I grew up on the North Shore of Long Island, mostly in a town called Port Washington, which was a pretty mostly middle class mostly, although there was a peninsula off of it that was called Sands Point, and Sands Point was very affluent. So you had people like Edgar and Johnny Winter living there, and John Cassavetes and Perry Como, and a lot of famous people. It was a way to live a nice lifestyle without it being, the paparazzi being around you, like living in Hollywood or even in Manhattan or whatever. So, but my parents were not rich. My dad was an auto mechanic, and it's funny because I'm not sure exactly how it is that I came to start to love what I love. I do have a couple of ideas, but like I had no interest in what my father did. Like I was not interested in cars. He actually drove in demolition derbies
Oh, that's cool.
which was cool. But this is when I was 5,
Mm-hmm.
and I very, very small memories of it. I mostly remember sitting in its stands watching these cars crash into each other and my mother looking terrified the entire time.
Fair enough.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But none of that held any interest to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really. I was a terrified little kid. I was scared of everything. And it's so ironic that the one thing that I found that I really loved was the thing that scares most other people, which were monster movies.
Monster movies are terrifying.
Well, the one that got me started, I'm sure a lot of my fans and so forth have sick of me talking about it, but it's just an important part of who I am and what I do, and why I do what I do now is that when I was like 6 or so, I saw this movie called Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. And it just came on, it was on the TV one day. And while my parents and their friends and my, aunts and uncles, they were, playing cards in the kitchen, whatever. And I had a younger brother, but he was, if I was 6, he was 3, probably not like great company,
Yeah.
So I see this movie comes on and I've never heard of Frankenstein's monster or Count Dracula or the Wolf Man before. They were completely unknown to me, and all of a sudden I'm seeing this magical film with these characters, and it's a comedy, but it's got all these amazing characters in it, and somehow I knew even back then. Like I just remember thinking, I don't know how they do this, but I want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I want this to, and I started drawing the monsters, and this is before, the age that we're in now of instant gratification, where if you like a movie, you buy the movie, you have it on your shelf, and you can go and watch it anytime you want. So this is way before VHS or DVD or Blu-ray or anything like that. So if you missed the movie when it came on television, that movie might not be on for years.
Yeah.
And that was the case with this movie. I was so just so amazed by every part of it, and but then I didn't see that movie again for years. So in between, I just relied on my memory of it, and I would constantly with my Crayola crayons draw them as best as I could remember them, but it definitely strangely put me on this track that would inevitably lead me to the career that I have now,
which is incredible.
It's pretty amazing. I mean, that I had I not seen that movie that morning, would I still be so in love with horror and sci-fi and fantasy and work in it? I don't know. Sometimes you never know, where just being in the right place at the right time, seeing the right thing at the right time, can alter the course of the path of your life, really.
And people think 6-year-olds are useless.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to think that made me not useless.
Well, being put on a path like that is pretty powerful and pretty motivating. That's inspiring. Like at the age of 6, being like, I want to figure out how they do this, and I want to make a living doing it. Like that's amazing.
Well, it's funny. There was a magazine that started, I think, in the very early 60s, and then went on for a few decades, called Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. And you could buy it in the corner store, like with Life magazine and everything else. And I came across an issue of this when I was a little bit older, a few years after seeing this movie. And there were pictures from that movie in this magazine. But even better, there were pictures that showed craftsmen working on movies, behind the scenes stuff. So I just remember in particular, there were 2 photographs that I could not stop looking at them. And one of them was this famous Hollywood makeup artist named Jack Pierce. And it was a picture of him with Lon Chaney Jr. sitting in the makeup chair, and he's putting on the Wolfman makeup on Lon Chaney Jr. And the other one was the special effects legend Ray Harryhausen, who was famous for creating stop motion creatures. So he did like Sinbad movies and dinosaur movies and so forth. There was a picture of him animating a dragon from the movie The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, which was a movie I had seen at that point. And, the dragon is only about 18 inches long, and, and he's there manipulating it in this picture. And I think that is when I really went, oh, okay, this is something you can do.
Mm-hmm.
There are jobs, that like you can actually make a living, working on these things. I mean, I had no idea at that time how you achieved that, but at least I saw those photographs and I was just like, okay, so that means that this doesn't come out of the air. It's real. It's something to work towards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it must have felt like a world away from Long Island.
Oh, big time. Yeah. I mean, it was all, most movies were still being done in Hollywood at that time. Some were shot in New York, but for the most part, Hollywood is Hollywood, right? And yes, it was so far away. I still had no idea. And I wasn't self-secure enough to just go like some people do, when they're very young and just go, I'm just going to go out there. I wasn't ready for that. Yeah. So it would take a while.
So what is a lover of monsters and sci-fi do in university?
Oh,
or let's go back a little. What about high school? Like, how did you kind of enrich this desire to work in movies and stuff like that when you made it to high school and had a little bit more idea?
I think that I did pretty much the only thing that you could do when it comes to high school. So I enrolled in the drama department and started acting, and that gave me a lot of confidence. Actually, that was really a good thing for me, and because eventually I would be utilizing that craft. And also I there was this is a very I think I have the picture in my book, but I was a member of the science fiction club in high school, which was
of course
nerdiest bunch of kids you've ever seen. And I was a little kid too. I didn't blossom until I was like 17 or so, you know what I mean? So I in this picture of me in the science fiction club, I just looked like this scrawny little thing, The problem got picked on probably. Not probably, I did. And but as I learned like how acting worked and then studying film, there were a lot of teachers in my high school who were really cool because they actually taught classes in filmmaking, which not all high schools do, right?
I don't think mine did. We had an audio visual department, and but I think it was more like for recreation. I don't think they really like taught a class. Like there was an AV club,
yeah,
and they would teach you like how to edit back in the day when you had the board and you had to actually move physical tape.
Yeah,
but it wasn't a class or anything like that. Yeah.
I had some English classes. I remember one of them was called Books into Film, and over the course of the semester, you would read a novel and then watch the movie version of it, and you'd have to write an essay on what the differences were and so forth. So I was learning about film to a certain degree, but not like a full film school. Obviously, these were just separate courses. And there was actually a screenwriting. I guess it was screenwriting. It was similar to Books into Film, or maybe it was the same class now that I'm thinking about it. But I remember one of the assignments was pick a book and then write and then try to adapt it into a screenplay.
Well, that's a great class.
Yeah, it was really fun. And actually, the book I chose, I remember, has been made into a movie several different times. It's a book by Richard Matheson called I Am Legend.
Oh, man.
Which has been made with Vincent Price, with Charlton Heston, and the Will Smith. So.
Yeah. And they're doing a number 2 now with Michael B. Jordan, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah. If they own the rights to it, they'll milk it. That's for sure.
Yeah. It's such a great. I Am Legend is such a great, like, iconic storyline. I mean, it's just like one man taking on the world, right?
Yeah.
I only saw the Will Smith version of it, but I thought it was spectacular.
Yeah. It's the Vincent Price version, which was from 1964. I want to say somewhere around there. I can't remember exactly. I think it's 1964. Is the one that's the most accurate to the book. The other adaptions, Charlton Heston in the 70s, and then Will Smith. They definitely took a lot of liberties and made a lot of changes, from the book. But the essence of it is still the same. What do you do when you're the last man on Earth?
And fighting all the zombies, trying to find a cure to save civilization. I love zombie movies because I think we're like just one COVID pandemic away from all becoming zombies anyways. Right?
I think there was a lot of that talk when COVID in 2020 when everything went down. Yeah. Certainly my people kind of reveled in making jokes about it, but not that it was a funny thing at all, but it was just like, wow, this is right out of a George Romero movie, basically. So.
So what was a typical science fiction club meeting discussion in high school? I don't even know it. I mean, were you guys talking about like books or movies or comics?
Mostly movies.
Yeah.
I think that there was the one teacher who was the sort of the one who was sort of our mentor for it. He would this is back in the days with 16 millimeter projectors, and he would rent a 16 millimeter version of a classic science fiction movie, so like War of the Worlds or The Time Machine or Forbidden Planet, and from the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And we after school would show the movie, just watch the movie, and then talk about it, and but there we wouldn't be writing essays on it or anything like that. It was just sort of us all kind of reveling in the beauty of it all.
Yeah.
Now one thing that I did do that I started going to so around 15 or so, started going to conventions, and because they would have science fiction conventions in New York, in Manhattan, and I was just a Long Island Railroad trip away. But my friends and I would go, and we'd actually get to see the actors from Star Trek and some old movie actors and so forth, and they were really fun. And we would. That started my collecting stuff, like collecting movie posters and stills and lobby cards. They used to lobby. They don't do lobby cards anymore, but back then, like all the movie theaters would get like 11 by 14 cards that were sort of like mini posters that they.
Those are nice keepsakes.
Yeah, for sure. And so my friends and I will collect that kind of thing, and so we had. The public library that we had in Port Washington was very progressive. Like it was a brand new building that they had built, and it was very modern. And they had a very big, basically AV department they actually had a stage in the library where they would always be showing movies for free.
Mm-hmm.
And my two of my friends, my closest friends back then, who were two that also were interested in monster movies and sci-fi and so forth, right? Because back then, again, before the internet, sometimes being a horror movie fan could be a very lonely existence if you didn't find at least a couple of other people that had the same interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we approached the library and said, what if we put on our own convention? And they said yes. So, I mean, it wasn't a convention like the ones in New York. There were hundreds and thousands of people, but we had a whole weekend where we just showed old sci-fi movies
So you basically set up your own film festival.
Yeah, and it was so great that the people that ran that library were so open to having these kids put this thing on. I think I was 16. I think my friend Jonathan was 17, and they just let us do what we wanted to, and they paid for everything because you had to rent the movies to be able to show.
Yeah, I was just going to ask where the movies come from.
Yeah, back then they had. There were a couple of companies that basically had all these films on 16 millimeter, and so they would rent them to schools, to libraries, to art houses, for I think it was a very, very reasonable fee. But I just thought it was just so cool, and so what we did was we actually had like a couple of guest speakers come during it too. Like I don't remember who they were now, but they were sci-fi writers of some note, and that would give a talk, and then we'd show a movie, and we had nice crowds. I mean, to my memory, probably, between 70 and 100 people came to this thing.
That's amazing.
Glory,
That's incredible that, that initiative at like in your late teens, you were able to put on basically your own like science fiction film festival in your small town in Long Island.
Yeah. Well, and this was, again, this was the closest at the time that I could get to being a part of the real, business of filmmaking. And so it was very gratifying for sure.
Well, it's almost like you didn't go to Hollywood, you just brought everyone to you.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. But eventually, it was funny. It was right around the time where I was thinking to myself that I didn't know if I was going to ever really go out to LA and pursue this stuff. I guess after when enough time passes, you're just kind of like, is this really going to happen for me or not? And I got a phone call one day from I was working as an artist for this crazy toy inventor who he was running his business out of his apartment in New York City, right? And he was a very strange guy. He thought he was going to be the next Milton Bradley or whatever, and so had me in his apartment, like drawings and making out all kinds of logos and things for his toys, right? But some of his toys were just nuts. They were just so weird. Anyway, I get a phone call there. And it was from a guy I knew in high school, actually since elementary school. His name was John Fasano. And he was also a monster movie fan, I remembered, right? And I think we had done some plays together in high school. And anyway, he calls me up and he says, "Hey, listen, I wrote this monster movie, and they're going to be making it up in Canada." And he said, "And there's a part that I think you'd be really good at. Is that something that would interest you?" And I remember looking over at my boss, who was sitting there designing a board game that you played with real cheese. And I was like,
"That's a winner."
I was like, "Yeah, you know what? I think I would very much be interested in trying out for your movie."
Yeah.
And
how old were you at that stage?
So now I was 20 something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Maybe 25.
Okay.
And
do you remember the name of the movie?
Oh yeah, of course, because I made the movie. I got the part. The movie is called Zombie Nightmare. Now, it is a little bit. It's a kind of notorious now. It's now considered a cult movie for a lot of reasons. But at the time, I was just thrilled. I just couldn't believe it. Like, the part that they gave me was like the hero character, a young detective, right? And he's been, his boss, his captain, has put him on this case of these kids that are being murdered, right? and of course, not knowing that it's a zombie that's killing them and getting revenge. And the really exciting part was being on a film set, even though it wasn't the first film set I was on. I was on one before. I'll tell you about in a minute. But it seems surreal. I was like, wow, like cameras and trailers, and there's people like who are in charge of my costume and makeup and all these things, and it was a dream come true. My co-star, well, it was going to be, they told me it was going to be between the actor who was going to be playing my boss, the captain, was going to be between Leslie Nielsen and Adam West.
Oh my God.
Right? And I was good either way, right? I mean, Leslie Nielsen was the star of Forbidden Planet, which is a movie I absolutely loved. And this was before he went into basically just making comedies. But
that was my era. Yeah, Airplane and Naked Gun.
Yeah, which is great. He was wonderful in those movies. But prior to that, he almost always either played the hero guy or the villain. He didn't do a whole lot of comedy before Airplane, but boy, that changed the trajectory of his career. And
he found a niche.
Yeah. And Adam West was Batman. And I remember watching Batman around the same time that I saw Abbott and Costello, and when it was on primetime on ABC. I was a little kid, but boy, it was the biggest show on television. And the idea that I'd be acting with, basically a childhood hero was kind of almost like I wasn't sure that I was like dreaming or not, and it turned out that Leslie Nielsen apparently said that he had broken his ankle or fractured his ankle or something like that skiing, and I've always said, well, that's his story anyway. But so Adam West ended up playing the part, and he was awesome. He was absolutely wonderful to work with, and we stayed friends for years afterward. But also Tia Carrera was in it. It was her first movie, and one of the kids who gets murdered by the zombie was played by this 17-year-old kid who was on a break from Yale. So he was a smart kid. And his name is Sean Levy. Sean Levy is now one of the biggest
directors. Just did Deadpool and Wolverine. Yeah. And Sean Levy did one of the Mission Impossibles too. He's
very talented. And it does not surprise me at all, because I didn't have I only had one scene with him in Zombie Nightmare, and in that scene he's dead. So he just had to lay there, right? Well, me and another actor are just talking over him. But I did spend time with Sean, like, running lines with him when, they were shooting something else or whatever. And I just remember even back then going, this is a smart kid. Like, wow. Like, I can tell that this kid is going to go places. And he certainly did that. And then some, Yeah. But the movie, the director was not a director. He had come from the adult film world, so he didn't really have a clear vision of what the movie was supposed to be. Now, that was not my friend John, the one that invited me to be a part of it, right? John was acting as the first, the assistant director, and I can just remember. Only having been on one movie set prior to this, I could even tell that this guy didn't really, his heart was not in this movie. He was at one point, and this is kind of for people that know how we make movies to a certain degree, but we shot this scene where the zombie comes, and actually was a scene where the zombie kills Sean Levy, right? And they shot the master shot, which is the shot that is usually a wide shot, and basically everything that happens in the scene happens in that shot, right? Once you get that, then you move in for what they call coverage, right? So then you're going to move into close-ups of each of the different characters so that the editor has something to cut to, right? Well, we shot this master shot, and John Fasano says to the director, well, okay, I think we got the master. Shall we move in for coverage? And the director just went, you see the same thing in the long shot. And John Fasano and I just looked at each other like, what? Like, you're not going to shoot close-ups of anyone? Like, your editor's not going to be happy with you at all. But I guess, in the adult film world, you don't really need to go in for coverage.
No.
It's all pretty much in one shot, right?
And yeah, done much faster, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Exactly. So anyway, so the movie did not come out as good as it could have because there just wasn't enough. The director just wasn't a director, right? And so the movie kind of came and went. It came out on VHS and then it disappeared.
Didn't even get a theatrical run?
No. This is right at the start of the VHS boom, basically. So everybody now was getting their VHS their VCRs and so forth, and so distributors, unless they saw like a movie making a lot of money in a movie theater, they just put it out on VHS.
Now it's like that's a streaming,
right? Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So the movie kind of came out on VHS, disappeared for a while, and then several years later, a series called Mystery Science Theater 3000 discovered Zombie Nightmare. And Mystery Science Theater 3000 is a show where these made by comedians that takes place in outer space, where this guy and these two robots are forced to watch bad movies, and they make remarks about the movie. They call riff on the movie the whole time that they're watching it, right? And the show became very, very popular, and they found a copy of Zombie Nightmare and they aired it, and it turned out to be one of the most popular episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000 ever. And
just because they were ripping into it.
Yeah, just because we were ripping into it, and suddenly there was this whole new audience for this movie, or this movie that's just not really that good. It's fun to watch, but it's not a good movie, right? And I'm very happy with what I did in the movie, and thankfully they didn't tease me too much on Mystery Science Theater. They had bigger fish to fry between Adam West and Tia Carrera. So, but it opened up this whole new audience to this movie. And then what happened was a distribution company, wanted to release the movie in its original format. And I ended up doing a whole audio commentary for it, and it was just so funny. It was just like, I never expected this. Like, I never expected that the first monster movie that I would actually be in would not be good, number one. And I never expected it would end up on Mystery Science Theater, and then I never expected that would cause it to actually have a fan base.
Yeah.
And so it's really fun now, as I have people come up to me when I do conventions now, and they're just like, oh my God, I love Zombie Nightmare so much. It's so fun. What was it like working with Adam West? And, and it's really fun. So I totally embrace the fact that it, even, or I should say, despite the fact that it's not a good movie.
It's amazing how, like, once you just make something, audiences will find it somehow, right? Like, as long as you do the work and put it out into the world, good, bad, or ugly, people will find it and embrace it somehow.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're 17 years old in high school, and you've got your science fiction after-school class watching movies. Then you put on your own science fiction film festival at your local library. Okay, walk me through what happens between 17 and 25 when you're starring in this movie.
Okay, so I then went to college in upstate New York, way upstate New York, like not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. And this college sat right on Lake Ontario, which is a lake, but looks like an ocean because you can't see the other side. You can't see the,
and that's where I'm from, Toronto.
Oh, right. Yes. Well, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
There is another side.
Yeah, there absolutely is. I've been on both sides actually, because the 3 movies that I made after Zombie Nightmare, we shot in Toronto, all 3 of them. But yeah, so I went to the State University at Oswego, and that my major was theater, my minor was art, and I think I really learned everything that I know about acting. I learned while I was there, and I consider myself a pretty good actor, even if I'm in not great movies.
But cult classics.
They are cult classics.
Yeah.
So I really got interested in the craft of acting, and then a really cool thing happened shortly after. I didn't graduate from Oswego. I didn't have the money to keep going, but after after a few semesters, I came back home, but I was still acting. So I toured. I did plays where I toured. I did, Barefoot in the Park and Mr. Roberts and all these, a whole bunch of plays, anything I could do. But this really cool thing happened, and I alluded to this earlier, was that so I mentioned that Sands Point off of Port Washington was a very affluent area. My friend Scott, his parents owned Nina Shoes, which I don't know if they're still in business anymore, but there was a big shoe company, right? So they had money, and they had a mansion that was in Sands Point. And one day, Scott called me up, and he said, "Hey, they're shooting a movie here at my parents' house. Why you should come by, because I know you like that kind of stuff, right?" Like, cool, great, right? So I'm expecting that, I'm going to get there and it's going to be a little, independent movie, something not grand by any means. But I get there, and one of the PAs that's there, production assistant, says, first of all, I learned my first lesson about movie sets is that you
whispering is essential.
Yeah. She was like, go around the back. Okay, so I walk around the back, this big house, and the first thing my jaw just dropped, because the first thing I see is Martin Scorsese sitting in a director's chair, and I'm like, I knew who he was, I knew what he looked like. I was like, God, that's Martin Scorsese. Holy cow, right? And then I look over, and it's to where what he's looking at, and Robert De Niro and Jerry Lewis are rehearsing a scene, and I didn't know the name of the movie at the time. Now it's The King of Comedy, but I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and that day was it was one of the biggest moments in my trajectory, because now I could finally actually see what it was like, and I'm so glad I did that, because it helped when I got onto the set of my first movie, that I watched them that whole day and how things worked, and I didn't ask a lot of questions, because I was there as a guest, and I didn't want to intrude on their hard work, their very hard work. And but watching Martin Scorsese direct De Niro and Lewis was like, I really, it was a remarkable day. And I accidentally insulted Jerry Lewis, but that's
So I mean, like, what does that do to you at the age of 20? I mean, that must just light such a fire inside you.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. It was what I needed, right? To keep reminding myself that this is what I wanted ever since I was little, right? So it did. It got me I think I was probably concentrating more on the acting side of things at that time. So, but had, look, I just watched, Oscar winning actor acting like right in front of my face, and like, so that was really inspiring. And I think it just made me want to continue. It forced me to continue doing that instead of getting a job doing whatever in my small town. You know what I mean?
And giving up that dream.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny how like I really feel like a lot of times when we're in a career and we're chasing something, we have lulls of motivation, right? Like it's a constant up and down process of motivation, momentum, just excitement, right? Like it's not a constant. Like we have our ups and downs, but it's funny how like sometimes those big moments hit right when you need them, and then they get you right back going in the right direction. That's kind of sounds like that happened to you.
It's exactly it. It is like a roller coaster. You get these highs and then your lows and then highs again, and they always, like you said, I think that they always seem to, the high points always seem to happen when they're needed the most.
Just as they're written in the script.
And so that's, that was pretty much what happened between 17 and my getting the role on Zombie Nightmare. But the great thing then was I developed this great relationship with John Fasano, and he then made 3 more movies in Toronto, and he put me in all of them.
That's amazing.
And so I basically for 4 straight years made four horror movies, and had good roles in all of them. And by that end of that 4 years, I was just like, okay, now I'm confident. Like because when I would go on a movie set, especially those 4 movies, I would go to set even if I wasn't needed, right? Just to watch, just to learn, just to talk. I would talk. What I couldn't do on the set of The King of Comedy was I able to talk to the sound guys and to the costume people and the best boy and the key grip, and find out what everybody does and why they do it. And so those 4 years, those 4 horror movies, that was my film school.
Mm-hmm.
And it was invaluable.
Yeah. Did you have like representation at that stage? Like, or were you just like friends with the first AD and that's how you got the roles? Like, did you even have to audition?
No, did not have to audition, which was amazing because I hated auditioning. I really did. I didn't. I never had the visceral stamina for it somehow. But John, who had written Zombie Nightmare, and was the first AD, those next 3 movies, he was the director. So an actual director, unlike the first one. So, he referred to me once, and I love this. He referred to me as his Ward Bond, and Ward Bond was an actor that John Ford used in every one of his movies, like all the westerns that John Ford made in the the 50s and so forth. He said they always had Ward Bond in it. So John called me his Ward Bond. So he would just put me. He would write, or when he would write the script, he would write a role for me that he knew that I could play.
What a fantastic relationship to have.
It was great.
Yeah.
It was really great. We those years, those 4 or 5 years, actually 4 movies for 5 years. Like we spent a lot of time, not just in the making of the movies, but just sort of really talking about movies that we might make, and talking about screenwriting and so forth. John gave me my very first opportunity to write something for a movie, because the second movie that we made was called Rock and Roll Nightmare. It's another nightmare, right?
These names are fantastic.
I know. And so we were shooting this thing in a farmhouse in Toronto, or on the outskirts of Toronto. And I guess at one point, and I was wearing a lot of hats on that one. John had me be not only as an actor in the movie, but I was the second AD. I helped make some of the special effects. If the crew needed peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because it was 2:00 in the morning and we weren't done, like I would do whatever was needed.
A true team player.
Well, yeah, and we all had to be. We were shooting a movie for I think the budget was $60,000. And so everybody chipped in to do what they did, whatever was needed, basically. But John came up to me one day and he said, I have this scene and I have this scene, and I need a bridge. I need a scene in between those two scenes, and I don't have it. And he said, I want it to be one of your scenes, so why don't you just write me a scene?
Just like that.
Yeah. And I was like, sure, why not, right? So I remember like taking a yellow legal pad and a pencil and sitting down and writing out this little like eight bits of dialogue, I think, entirely. And
you didn't write yourself like a soliloquy like Hamlet or anything like that? I'm going to show everyone my talent now.
That's right, John. You opened up the door. And so I wrote this scene and I showed it to him and he said, great. He goes, come, let's shoot it. And I think that right at that point is when I got bitten by the screenwriting bug. Because I really liked what I wrote and I felt really good about it. And I was just like, maybe I've been concentrating on the wrong aspect of this business. Maybe I'm better suited for that. And so that's when I started actually doing my homework about that and, reading any books I could on screenwriting and paying attention to how movies, the structure of movies, and so forth. So that is literally how the screenwriting portion of my career started, was just with that one page of dialogue.
So after 4 movies in 5 years, and then also getting a bit of a bug for the screenwriting world, did you then move to Los Angeles?
Yes. Well, it's funny. So Fasano, he after the 4th movie that was done, he went straight out to Hollywood, right? And he had a script that he had written, and he sold it almost immediately. I think he sold it even before the plane landed. I mean, it was so fast. Morgan Creek, which is a very big production company, bought it from him, and we were all like, "Wow! Like,
is it that easy?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's not that easy.
And I was like, "Well, hell!" Like, and I had already started writing scripts, so I had a couple of scripts, and I thought, if John can do this, I can do it too. So I quit my job on the 18th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center.
Oh, Jesus! What year was that?
This was way before, but I don't know. I could have still been working there in 2001. Was it 2001?
I was on the observation deck of the World Trade Center South Tower, I think, in May 2001. I was a tourist. That was the first time I ever went to New York.
Wow. Yeah. I was working there as like doing graphic art work. And I was like, okay, it's time to move, right? To go out there. And I dragged my wife, kicking and screaming, to Los Angeles, and then started trying to find, get my foot in the door with these 2 scripts that I had. And boy, oh boy, it didn't work quite so easily as it did for John, right? I couldn't get anyone to read these, and I made all the rookie moves. I sent copies of my scripts to all of the agencies, and they all came back unopened.
Oh shit!
Oh yeah. There's a stamp on it that basically said, it is a legal liability for us to even open this if it doesn't come from a legitimate, rep.
Yeah.
So
unsolicited.
Yes. Exactly. And so I was really kind of getting after a year and a half or so, I was starting to really feel like, oh, did I make a mistake? It's bad enough that I made my poor wife move out here.
So what were you doing on the side, for a year and a half while you were trying to get into this?
I would take whatever job I could. So I worked as an extra. I worked, as a stand-in. I work as a PA on movies.
What about John? Was he still doing anything?
John was now they didn't make his movie, the movie that he sold to them. They never made that movie. But then he got hired to write another 48 Hours for Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy, and then he wrote 8 drafts of Alien 3, and then he wrote Tombstone, and he was working in with the big boys.
Yeah, those are all great. Yeah,
yes. And so in fact I hardly saw him.
Oh.
Because he was way up here and I was still way down here. And I was really getting kind of depressed about it. I was just like, yes, I'm here in LA and I'm working on movies, but not in the capacity that I expected to be. I mean, I was an extra on a movie called Clifford with Martin Short and Charles Grodin.
I remember that movie.
Yeah, remember that movie?
Yeah,
I was actually. That's a very quick aside. I'll just tell you this because I love to tell this. I learned something very, very important on that movie because it was one of the first movies I worked on when I got out here, and it had, like I said, it had Charles Grodin and Mary Steenburgen and Dabney Coleman and Martin Short, right? And one thing that I watched happen, which I'll never forget this, and I never have forgotten it as far as how I treat people on movie sets. When it broke for lunch, Charles Grodin and Mary and Dabney they'd go to their trailers to go have their lunch. Martin Short would grab a tray and go to the catering truck, get the food from the catering truck, and then go sit with the extras and just chat.
That's amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah. I love Martin Short. Good Canadian boy.
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
I talked to him about that because I had just made 4 movies in Canada.
Yeah.
So the DP on the movie I made called Black Roses was a friend of his.
Oh.
So we had a nice chat about Paul. Super nice guy. But I just thought he doesn't have to do that. Look how happy he made all those extras. That he would just sit down and just start talking to them.
And this is before Instagram and social media and people trying to hunt for likes and all this garbage.
Yeah. He just did it because he's just a good person.
There's a great documentary about Steve Martin on Apple Plus. I'm not sure if you've seen that.
Heard about it.
Yeah. And obviously Martin Short plays a huge role in it, and they're best friends even to this day, and they still call each other 5-6 times a day. And I went to a live event with Steve here in LA where they talked about it, and Martin Short called him while he was on stage so that he could talk to the audience as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's great. That's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's I wish there was more of it in Hollywood. Not that I'm not a jaded person. I don't hate Hollywood or anything like that. In fact, I love it. It's the reason I'm still in it. But I was going to say that. So I had these 2 scripts, and like I said, I couldn't get anyone to even look at them. And one day, I happened to, my wife introduced me to this gentleman that was doing consulting for this production company that she was helping cast. She was doing casting at that point, right? And
does she have any acting ambitions when she came out here?
Yeah, she had some acting ambitions, and she was actually in one of the 4 horror movies. The scene that I wrote that I was talking about earlier is a scene actually between me and her in that movie.
Were you guys married at that stage?
No, we were not. We were playing newlyweds, but we weren't married yet.
Oh.
So she introduced me to this nice gentleman, and his name is William Asher. And I knew who he was, right? William Asher is this legendary producer, director. He directed almost all the episodes of I Love Lucy. He created Bewitched for his wife at the time, Elizabeth Montgomery, right? And I've just seen his name, my whole life on television and in movies, right? and he was a very nice man. And I told him my tale of woe. I was just like, yeah, I came out here and I got these scripts and nobody will read them. And he said, I'll read them. I was like,
how the fuck did that just happen?
exactly. I joke in the book. I think I said that like I was so worried that when my jaw hit the floor, it would hit his foot by accident, and he'd get mad, you know. But he said, yeah. He goes, sure, I'll read them. So he took them, and then a few days later, he called me back into his office, and he said, so this first one, he goes, I didn't dig it, and it's not that it's badly written or anything like that. It's just that it deals with like supernatural. And he goes, I produced a TV series about magic for 10 years and I'm kind of over that. Like it has no spark for me anymore. But then he goes, this, the second one, he was like, he says, this is terrific. He goes, this is very good. He goes, I enjoyed it all the way through. He said, if this is in fact what you're capable of, he goes, then I'm telling you, don't quit. Don't give up. Don't move back to New York. Just stick with it. Just stick with it. He said, if this is an indication of what you can do, you will get a manager or an agent in time.
You had a second Scorsese moment.
This one was again, the dots, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was right. I didn't go back to New York.
He wasn't able to give you a job or anything like that? No.
He said that. He said, he goes, look, I can't personally do anything for you because at this point I'm pretty much retired and I'm just kind of doing consulting with this company here. And he said, but he said, I have a good feeling about it. Like, just stick with it. Just trust me and stick with it. So I did. And he was right. About maybe 4 or 5 months later, I landed my first manager.
Mm-hmm.
And then, wow, I started getting jobs, writing movies and movies that actually got made, and suddenly now I was actually doing what I always wanted to do, what I hoped to do, what I dreamed of doing. It was now a reality, and it was fantastic. It was fantastic.
How hard were those 18 months though, or like that year and a half of just nothing?
It was tough.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing there was one thing that kind of kept me sane through it, and that is that John Fasano wanted to. There was this weird kind of fad that was happening at the time. People were making full-length movies on Super 8 sound, which was nuts. I'm not even 16 millimeter,
mm-hmm.
Super 8 sound. And there was a company that had that was in Burbank. I think they're still there actually. That had created a blimp for a Super 8 camera. A blimp meaning basically a box that the camera goes in that will then muffle the sound of the camera motor, so that it didn't ruin your sound when you're filming, right? And so John was very intrigued by this, and he goes, I'll tell you what, he goes, write a movie, write a horror movie, and make it something that you can film easily, like, not a lot of locations and so forth. And he goes, I'll give you $10,000 to a budget to make it, and utilizing this technology, this Super 8 sound technology. And so I did. I wrote a movie I called Spider Bite, and it was a very minimalist horror story that mostly takes place in one location, and we made that movie, and unfortunately, it never got any kind of a release, just because John made so much. I think this is the reason. I can't say for absolutely sure, but John was making so much money at that point, like working
all the studios,
that he needed write-offs, and so he'd take any write-offs he could get, and So $10,000 was a good write-off. But the thing was, if he did that, he could not release the movie. It had to be a failure basically. So I still have a copy of it, and I'm very proud of it actually, considering I'm just very happy with the story and the dialogue that I wrote for it, and I was very happy with the actors that were in it. And
you should digitize it and put it out on YouTube.
I have it digitized, and the only problem with it is it has the special down below that says for screening purposes only.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these days with AI, there's probably a way to remove that from a film now.
Mm-hmm. I can do it. I can do it for sure.
Okay.
Would John be okay with that?
Well, John has passed away since. So that's the thing, is that like wherever the masters for Spider Bite were, Lord knows where they are now. Like, I've asked his kids if they know where, and they don't know. They don't know where they go. But that was a really good thing to have happen, because it kept my creative juices flowing for that amount of time of, first writing the script, and then going through all the pre-production of casting it, and obviously I had a lot of help. I had a friend of mine who produced it with me, and I made my wife the lead for the simple reason that I knew that since we weren't paying anybody, I knew that she was not going to get a role in a paying movie and leave in the middle of the shoot. So, but she was actually really, really good. So it worked out. It was a win-win for everybody, right? But that's what kind of kept me going. I mean, partly there was other things I was doing. I was still like writing stuff on spec and so forth. But until I got my first manager, it was just do whatever you had to do.
What was it like getting that first manager, and then all of a sudden being busy in exactly what you want to do, exactly where you want to be? Like, that must have just been like night and day.
It was suddenly everything felt so validated at that point. And the fact that I was being respected as a writer was a really grand feeling, and I really took it very, very seriously. I didn't.
Was the WGA things around then at the WGA?
The movies that I wrote were not signatory. So I actually did. It's interesting. I wrote a whole bunch of movies over the years. And it wasn't until I started writing for television a few years ago that I finally joined the Writers Guild. But most of the time, if I didn't need to, I mean, my manager even said, "Don't join it unless like they insist that you should." You know what I mean? Like, because most of those movies weren't studio pictures; they were independent films. They'd have really cool actors in them. The first one that I got that was made, one of the lead roles was went to David Warner, who was a British actor that I love. Like, he was in The Omen, he was in Time Bandits, he was in a great movie called Time After Time about H.G. Wells chasing Jack the Ripper through time. And he was just a marvelous, marvelous actor that I always admired. And so for him to be in my first produced movie was a big deal. I tried not to be starstruck, but, I love this guy, and thankfully, and I've been very lucky in this regard, that a lot of the people that I did end up working with on movies that I was, very involved in, were not assholes.
There you
go. David Warner was one of the most friendly people I ever met in my life. So it's always good if it's your first one, to have those good feelings happen. That not be just a disastrous situation that would just knock you back down again. I mean, they were all good. They were all good.
It seems like this town, for writers and actors, it's like a totally different world. I feel like writers are always writing, whether they're being paid to or not. Like they've always got a script. They've always working on a side project. They've always got something under their commissioned work that they've got. But actors in between movies, they're just doing nothing. I was speaking with an actor a couple months ago here on this podcast, and they quit eventually, and they were getting good roles, but they just couldn't handle the downtime.
It is difficult, and even with writing, you're right. A writer writes, and I was getting movies made, but sometimes it would be, could be 6 months, could be even a year in between a movie actually like getting made. And there's a very common misconception about screenwriters. A lot of people think that if you are a working screenwriter, that you write a script and you sell it and it gets made, and then you write another script and you sell it and it gets made. The truth is that maybe 5%, maybe even less than that, of the scripts that you get even hired to write get made.
Really, that low?
That low. I mean, I wrote dozens of scripts, hired, paid, right, that never got made. That it was the producer either lost interest or the money money never came through to actually make the film.
Sure.
I always got paid because I had a manager who made sure I got paid.
Managers,
but not as much as I would get paid if the movie got made.
Of course. Yeah.
That's a big difference between the initial payments and the final payments. So, but sometimes the movie would get made and there would be a very, very nice paycheck involved.
That's great.
And that would usually get me through to whatever the next thing was. But I did at one point, even though I was working and I was writing scripts and getting paid, and the opportunity came up, and I talked about it at the top of the program here, to go to Walt Disney
and work for the big mouse. Because you were making board games with cheese back in the day, weren't you?
That's right. Yeah, that's what I didn't even realize what foreshadowing that was. Amazing.
My future is with Disney.
My wife, was working in casting at the time, and she actually went to Disney and was helping cast their animated movies.
Mm-hmm.
And she called me up one day, and she was like, I've been talking to the artists here, and you could do this.
Really?
I was like, yeah, can I? I know how animation works, but I didn't have any kind of training in it. Like I didn't know the specifics of how it works. And she said, yeah. She goes like, you can draw, and that's the first thing that they're gonna look for. And she goes, think about it, because it would be a nice regular paycheck as opposed to a movie every 6 months or a year, and more and more that idea appealed to me, and so like I always do, I started doing my homework, and I started looking into it, and like what's involved, like what do I need to learn to how do I put together a portfolio to submit.
Mm-hmm.
Right, which is the way it works. You have to submit a portfolio to be considered. And so the Animation Guild, the union, which was located in Studio City at the time, they actually offered classes in animation, like how to learn how to do it, right? And they were open to the. I mean, you had to pay for them, but they weren't exclusive to just union members. Anyone could take the class. So I started taking classes to learn how to become what they call a cleanup animator. A cleanup animator is the person that does the clean, finished drawings, the ones that you actually see on a movie screen. And luckily I knew. Because I had an in there at Disney, I knew what the portfolio was supposed to look like. A lot of people make the mistake of they submit a portfolio and to Disney, and it'll be filled with drawings of Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and Peter Pan, and that's the last thing they want to see.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, they want to see life drawing and gesture drawing and anatomy and so forth, right? So luckily I had the heads up on that. So I submitted a portfolio, and I got into this training program, and they put me in this training program, which I think, if I remember correctly, was around 2 months long, where they trained you hard, man. Because what had happened was Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was part of Disney, right, and was part of partly responsible for some of their biggest movies, like Little Mermaid, The Beast, right? Well, he left
for DreamWorks.
Yeah. Right down the street from Disney, right? But he was also now like poaching artists. Come over to DreamWorks. We'll pay you more. We'll do this, whatever. And so Disney was desperate for new artists. So so I got into the training program. There was a test at the end of the 2 months. It was a 2-day test where you had to clean up this big scene, and luckily I passed. And they, like, talk about being thrown right into the fire, threw me right onto Hercules, which was the movie that they were already in the middle of making.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and this is what I love about this, is that it's so beautifully ironic that the first scene that they handed me to clean up was a scene of 3 monsters falling on top of each other. I thought, how perfect, my first scene at Disney, and it's a scene of monsters.
Full circle.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you just stop for a second and think, like, how cool your career has been, that you've gotten to itch 3 different creative muscles? Like, okay, first you started with acting. You did your four movies in 5 years, and then you're like, oh wait, screenwriting. This is taking me in a different direction. Then you had representation, and then you're making movies, in one or two a year, and then it's like, wow, I love art and I love drawing, and it's like, I'm gonna give animation a try. Like, the most people can't do any of those 3 things, and you have the chance to do them all at the highest level.
I was very blessed to, number one, to have some natural ability as far as being able to draw. So I kind of I was lucky about that. And I know I always joke when people say that, like, you've done all these different things, and I always joke and say, well, I'm easily bored. But the truth is that like it all comes from the same sort of creative core. They're different. They're 3 very different things, but it's all coming from the same heart and soul that's part of me. So it's just applying that drive and that joy and everything that comes from it. It's all just applying it in a different way, But I approach them all with the same, zeal, and if I'm not finding joy in it, I don't want to do it.
Fair enough.
An example of that actually is so I was at Disney for 8 years, right? I worked on a whole bunch of great movies, right?
And were you writing at that time, or just animating?
No, I couldn't. Once I signed the contract with Disney, I couldn't write anymore because I was under the umbrella of the Walt Disney Company. So my poor manager was so upset. Like she could not send me in for to pitch or anything like that for that time.
You think Disney would have asked you to write up a few things? Like, you're multi-talented.
They don't do that though. They don't. I mean, at least back then,
they seem to let Ryan Reynolds do whatever the hell he wants.
Yes, well, Ryan gets carte blanche. Well, him and Sean just gonna,
and Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah. But when I drew with a pencil on paper, right? But that came to a sudden end, right? Was talking about earlier about you never know when the rug's going to get pulled out from underneath you. I would have stayed working at Disney forever. I loved it, right? But the Pixar movies, which were all CG, were all making tons of money, while the hand-drawn movies were not doing as well. So
Give me an example.
So well, obviously the Pixar movies were all like between Toy Story and Bug's Life and Finding Nemo, etc., right? Or Monsters Inc. Like they were all making just millions and millions. Our movies like Atlantis, which was as a movie I still really love, and Treasure Planet, and they were not doing they were not doing nearly as well as the earlier hand-drawn movies were. So I think that the studio really looked at it from the perspective of CG movies make money and hand-drawn movies don't, which is ridiculous, because the truth is, if you made Finding Nemo hand-drawn instead of CG, it's still going to be a great movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it won't look exactly the same, but that's not the thing. It's all about the story. And, and John Lasseter, who was, running Pixar, one thing about the guy, man, he was a great story guy. He understood good stories. And I think that, that the era of Disney that I was just mentioning, the stories maybe weren't clicking with audiences as much. Although I have to defend Atlantis because I love Atlantis. It was a really hard movie to work on, but I still think it's marvelous. And it has also found over the years its own fan base and its own cult following, if you will. So, but I think that was it. And so and I talked about this earlier, it was just like, so I was very lucky because when the 2D experience ended, right, and they basically said Home on the Range was going to be the last hand-drawn movie, all of these artists now are out of work unless you were able to transition from hand-drawn to working a mouse.
Is that literally the transition?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I personally, I couldn't find the joy in this, in moving a mouse around, like the way the tactile, difference of holding a pencil in your hand and feeling the pressure and so forth, right? But I was very lucky because I had a career before I went to Disney. Some of these people that were now who'd been working at Disney for some of them for 30, 40 years. And now not only is the job gone, it's obsolete. And some of those people had never even held a job at like a Trader Joe's or anything before, And
it was all they knew.
Yeah, it's all they knew. Yeah, they came right out of Cal Arts and went right to, immediately right into working for the studio. And so I felt very blessed in that I had another career before that I could, and I did. So I went back to screenwriting and very luckily, some producers who remembered me from before I went to Disney, one of them actually, it was really funny, called me up like on my last week at Disney and said, "Hey, I've got a really fun idea that I want to write. Are you available?" And I was like, "Boy, your timing is perfect, buddy." It's like, yes, I happen to be available as of next Friday. So,
did your old manager pick you up again?
She did for a little while, and I found that mostly she actually became ill not long after that, and she passed away like a year or two after that. So I think that she kind of like stopped really working as hard as she did before, but I had developed so many relationships with a couple of producers in particular that that I was kind of working directly through them, and instead of like working through Catherine. So it worked out.
Again, amazing that you were able to, again, manage the pivot, right?
Yep. And
it should be the name of your book.
Maybe it'll be the next one. I have been lucky, but also I've worked really hard, and I never expected anything to be handed to me, even when it was. Like I said, like not having to audition for those horror movies was great. It's like John would be like, "Here's the script. You're playing Johnny." Here.
But five straight years of that. That's unbelievable. Just going movie to movie to movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have nothing but wonderful memories of those years. I would not be in the position I'm in now if John Fasano hadn't called me up and asked me to audition for that first movie, without a doubt.
Yeah.
At this point, I mean, I should, but I certainly owe so much to John for giving me that opportunity.
So 8 years at Disney, they changed the entire animation department to CGI and change all this beautiful traditional artwork of pencils and erasers and real tactile skill to now turning it basically into graphic arts and computers and mouses and everything like that, which you weren't interested in. So, I mean, what was that transition like going back into writing? I mean, like, what were you thinking? Like, holy shit, here we go again?
Or I mean, I was really, I definitely embraced it. I was like, okay, I'm ready to go back and do this again. I missed it. I mean, as great as it was, working for Disney and, doing animation for those years, I definitely missed the challenge of taking on a project and bringing it to fruition, at least as a screenplay form. And I got opportunities that I didn't have before, like being assigned a job where there was an existing material, like a novel, and then adapting that novel into a screenplay.
Like you did in high school.
Yeah. But now with the skills behind me, obviously, I really actually enjoyed that, because it was a lot more challenging than just writing a screenplay that's from scratch, because you have to honor the source material, but at the same time you have to be able to adapt it in such a way that it plays on its own as a movie. And sometimes, one of those, at least one of the books that I was given was written in the first person, so you're reading their thoughts. And the trick then, when you're making a movie, is to how do you translate that into dialogue in a movie without doing like a voiceover narration?
Well, you don't. You just hire Morgan Freeman.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
He's the voice of everything.
James Earl Jones.
Yes.
Yeah.
Before them. Yeah.
Right. And so these were new kinds of challenges that I got to do. Even though some of those movies never got made, just like I said before, because only a small amount do. But this is a great follow-up to my story about almost giving up and then being told by a legendary person not to. So one of the producers I worked with quite a lot was his name is Todd Traina, and I love Todd. He's a great guy, and we'd worked together on a bunch of projects. Anyway, I went to meet with Todd about a project that we were currently working on, and we went to like the Chateau Marmont or to some place like that, some obnoxiously Hollywood-esque kind of meeting thing, right? And when it was over, we were going and like waiting for our car, the valet to bring the cars or whatever, and Todd said, "Oh, by the way, I've been meaning to tell you, we have some movement on I Hate Kids." I Hate Kids was a comedy that we had written a few years before, right?
It's a TV series.
No, just a feature,
okay.
A comedy feature. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, cool. Like, what's happening? And he said, oh, because I've gotten a first investor, and he's put in like $1.2 million or something like that. And he said, I'm gonna work on raising the rest of it, because that's what one of the things Todd did was like find the money to make things, right. And I was like, oh, very cool. And he said, oh yeah, and we have a director. And I said, great, what's his name? He said his name is John Asher.
Oh, Jesus.
And I was like, wait a minute. I was like, John Mallory Asher. He goes, oh, I don't know his middle name. I said, was he a child actor? Like he was on the Weird Science TV series? He goes, no, I don't know. I said, was he married to Jenny McCarthy? And he goes, yeah, that's him. And I went, oh my God. The son of the man who told me not to quit 20 years earlier is now directing my movie. It was talk about your mind being blown, right?
Was that a total coincidence?
It was a total coincidence.
That's fucking crazy.
It was crazy. It was insane. And you can imagine when I finally get to meet John Asher and I tell him this story about his dad, his mind was blown, And I knew right at that moment, I said, like I said, a lot of times, most of the times, the movies don't actually get made. I knew right then and there that movie was going to get made. I was like, this synchronicity is just too much to not have it happen. You know what I mean? And
the stars were aligned.
Exactly it. Yeah, exactly. And so that movie got made and came out in 2019, so just a few years ago.
Okay.
But it was a great cast. It had Titus Burgess in it, and
the comedian
Tom Everett Scott, and Marissa Tomei had a part in it, and Ray Seahorn from Better Call Saul.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
yeah,
and she was awesome. She was one of my favorite people. But that's the thing. That's again, it's another dot on that roadmap, that just brings you way back up again. And it was great. It was really great because we shot it in the late summer, and we it was like a 4-week shoot, I think, 3 or 4 weeks shoot, and we had the wrap party after it, and the next morning I flew back to New York for my 40th high school reunion.
Oh, really?
And so you can imagine, I was like, I hope I wasn't a complete asshole because, just walking back and seeing these people I hadn't seen literally in 40 years and saying, well, yeah, I just came off the set of my movie with Marissa Tomei, it felt pretty good, honestly.
How have you dealt with these ups and downs, though? I mean, you say like, okay, I was acting, and then I got interested in writing, and then you wrote, and then it's like, okay, now I'm going to do animation, and then that didn't. Yeah, that was a great 8 years, but then that changed. You went back to writing. Like, you've the way you've described it, you kind of made it all just sound seamless. But was there any kind of dark moment in between any of those transitions?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, and I talk about that actually quite a lot in the book I just wrote, because it is important to know that it isn't all just beautifully streamlined. You're going to go through tough times if you're going to be in especially in a creative industry, and I certainly did go through my share of them, where I questioned myself and, or took a job I really didn't want to just to be able to pay the rent and but on the plus side, things always whether it's luck or divine intervention or whatever it is, I don't know, but things always seemed to show up when they needed to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I never take that for granted,
Well, it sounds too like, it sounds like you put good karma out into the world and then it came back, right?
I'd like to think so.
Yeah. I believe in that a lot. I think, if you treat people right and you try to do the right thing, it comes around and there's opportunities that will exist because of the way you treated someone 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And again, going back to watching Martin Short, grab a tray from the catering truck and sit with the extras is something that I definitely have never forgotten. And I always try to be the best person I can be to the people I'm working with.
Yeah.
Do my best. Anyway.
Yeah, be a good teammate, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
So okay, so you were working. That last movie was 2019. What was COVID like for you as a actor writer, animator.
Okay. Well, so
Or is this what happened to you during COVID when you wrote your book Monsters, Movies, and Me?
what's funny about it is that like I said before, that like had written all these movies over the years, but I was never in the Writers Guild. And then so a very good friend of mine, his name is Greg Nicotero, and he is one of the producers, directors of The Walking Dead. And
I've watched all of those series. I love them.
Oh,
I love zombie movies. Yeah.
right. So Greg is like one of the top guys on that show, and he got the rights to Creepshow, which was a George Romero movie from the 80s that was an anthology movie. So it had 5 segments in it, each one a little horror story. Stephen King actually wrote the screenplay for it. And so Greg got the rights to the name, and so he wanted to do a TV series based on Creepshow that would be similar to like an old show like Rod Serling's Night Gallery, where you would have a couple of different segments in each episode, and they would be they would be horrifying, but at the same time kind of fun also, like the Romero movie is. And so I didn't even write an outline. I wrote a whole episode, just on spec, and showed it to him. And because he had a season 1 that was very popular, right? But I didn't have anything to do with that season 1. A lot of my friends were working on it, and Greg was working on it. It's his show, and I'm like, I want to play in that sandbox, right? So when he got picked up for season 2, I just wrote an episode and I sent it to him, and he read it and he loved it, and he was like, he goes, I love this one so much. He goes, I want to direct this episode. So he had to submit it to the network because they still, even though it's his show, they still had to approve everything, right? And they loved it. So they sent me a contract like the next day. Like it came to me special delivery. Like they, like hurry up and sign this, right?
And this was for a full-time writing position?
No, this was just for this one episode at first,
okay.
Right? And so I was so excited about this. This was great. I was going to now be in the union, and I was going to continue to write episodes for the show. And what happened was, Greg also owns K&B Effects, which is one of the biggest effects houses here in Los Angeles, and they were building all these special effects, these monsters for this episode. And I got to go there, and I got to see them building this a spider the size of this table and all this cool stuff, right? And I got my plane tickets to go down to Atlanta, which is where they were shooting, and spend a week on the set, with Greg and watch them film it. And that was March of 2020.
Oh, wow. Shit.
Yeah. And sure enough, like we were just like, maybe it won't shut everything down. Maybe it won't shut everything down. And shut everything down. Every TV show, every movie. I think with the exception of some reality shows, they just COVID closed it, shuttered every studio. So by the time that they were able to start filming again wasn't until like October, right? By that time, though, COVID was still around, so the protocols were so severe that unless you had to be on set, unless you were absolutely needed, you were not allowed on set. So I did not get to go down to Atlanta and watch them shoot that episode. Greg was great though, because he would as they were filming, he would on his his phone, he would just like film a little bit of it and then send it to me so I could see what they were doing. And
that's sweet.
Yeah, no, it was super cool. And so yeah, I mean, COVID ruined us. I had a vampire movie that I had written that was kind of a kind of a vampire, a horror comedy, and it was in pre-production. And we had our locations, we had our lead actors, the office was open, and COVID shut that down. So yeah, that was a rough time, and the industry's been hit with kind of a few whammies actually now between COVID and then the strikes last year. It's been tough. So I haven't worked as much lately, but I'm pretty close to, I don't think I'll ever retire completely because I can't.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just can't help it. I'm a creative person. I'm just not going to stop. But like, I'm definitely not. I've definitely slowed down.
Yeah, it's been interesting. But hey, I mean, you're right. The industry has been through a pretty rough couple of years. But it looks like your boy Sean Levy's gonna supercharge it one more time.
I really hope someday I get to meet Sean again.
Yeah.
I don't know how he feels about Zombie Nightmare, but
and are you standing over him doing dialogue while he's just dying?
No, he was already dead. Yeah. He was lying on a rock with a baseball bat shoved into his stomach and this fake blood all around it. So, and he had this back then. He had this huge mop of hair, big 80s hair, which I know. I saw that on social media one time. He posted a picture of himself from the movie and making fun of himself about the hair,
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I don't think he talks about Zombie Nightmare too much.
No. That's pretty funny though, that's kind of where he started his illustrious career, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So, I mean, you came to Hollywood and you've become incredibly proficient and professional and a working creative in 3 of the toughest disciplines you can imagine as an actor, writer, and an animator or an artist. I mean, is there anything else that you haven't done yet that might be the next chapter of what other creative itch have you not scratched yet?
I don't know that there's anything else. I love all 3 of the things that I have mastered to a degree. What I really like to do now, honestly, is I like going to conventions now as a guest and meeting fans.
Mm-hmm.
And I take so much joy in that because I have these people who grew up. Some of them grew up watching movies that I wrote or the Disney films or whatever. I had a fan come up to me at a convention last November, and she was a fan of the one of the movies, the horror movies I made, called Black Roses, and she actually had the logo of from Black Roses tattooed on her hand.
Wow!
So like that, and she was so funny. She goes, I can't believe I'm meeting you. Black Roses is my favorite movie, and all this stuff, and then the Disney fans, obviously there's so many of them. It's funny. One of the characters that I worked on Hercules, is called Baby Pegasus, and he's just this cute little flying horse, and he's only in the movie for about a minute,
mm-hmm.
like total, and but that is the character that everybody wants to talk to me about. It's the one who's on the screen the least. It's so funny because he's just so adorable,
Yeah. Well, if they put him in the movie for 45 minutes or something like that, then it might have competed better against DreamWorks, maybe.
Yeah. Well, Hercules did well. They were still doing. I think things were good up until around Tarzan. After Tarzan, they started to add somewhat, but
yeah.
I was happy for the movies I worked on, for sure. Hercules and Mulan and Tarzan and Atlantis are all movies that are going to be around way longer than I will. So
when you were just randomly, when you were at Disney and then you guys would be charged to start working on a movie, how long would the animators have to work on a movie from start to finish?
Wow. Well, a movie back then from start to finish could take anywhere from 3 to 5 years.
Holy cow, really?
Yeah. From development all the way through to, finishing. Yeah. Yeah, it'd take that long. It's not like regular movie making at all.
Yeah.
It's a much more involved process and a lot more and very collaborative in that we all have our different departments, but we all feed off of each other. Everything dovetails into the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a much bigger process
Mm-hmm.
than when you have a movie, a live action movie, which can also be very involved and can take a long time as well. It can take years to shoot. And something like a Mission Impossible or a Lord of the Rings movie, certainly they take a long time too.
Yeah, James Cameron has been in New Zealand doing Avatar movies for almost 2 decades, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but an animated feature is a very, very long process. I mean, my part of it as a cleanup animator would go for about maybe a year and a half, and then I'd move on to the next one. Sometimes I wouldn't. I mean, or sometimes there would be a break where there would be nothing to do for 4 months in between, but the studio would just hold on to you.
Well, that's nice.
Because they didn't want you to go to Jeffrey.
Mr. Katzenberg. Yeah. How, I mean, it seemed like your early days, you found being on set really magical. Like you mentioned it, like when you talked about Scorsese and De Niro, like your eyes lit up, right? And then you got to do 4 movies in 5 years with one of your friends, and then when you were writing, you really enjoyed the opportunity to be on set as well. What was it like being 8 years in a studio at Disney, never being on set because there isn't a set because it's an animated movie? Like, did you miss that?
Oh, yeah. There's something about that happens to people that it happened to me is just like there's an energy, even when things are moving slowly. There's a certain energy and there's a certain dynamic about a movie set that some people, like myself and a lot of my friends, find magical. And it's part of the reason that sometimes you go to set even if you're not working that day, because you just feed off of that energy, and you love that all these people were all working together to create one thing. I love
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I will never, ever get tired of that. It's funny. I love this story. I read Michael Caine's autobiography.
He's brilliant, isn't he?
It's a great, by the way, if I say read it, don't, it's called The Elephant to Hollywood. Don't read it, listen to it, because when he reads it, you're getting his voice and his inflections and everything, and it's magical. But he tells this great story. I love this line. He says he was on this movie and he was sitting in his chair. He was waiting because they were tweaking lights or something like that, and it was taking a long time. And he said this PA, this production assistant, walked up to him very kind of sheepishly, and she was like, "Oh, Mr. Caine, we're really so sorry that this is taking so long, and you have to wait like this." And he said to her, "My dear, you pay me to sit around and wait. The acting I do for free." I've always loved that line because that sort of is how it feels. Like if you are bitten by this bug, I mean, unless it's just like really, really miserable conditions, there's just something magical about being on a movie set, and that aura that surrounds it, and I love every minute I'm on a set. And
yeah, it's quite special, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. This is not a claim to fame or anything, but I was an extra on a movie. Vince Vaughn was my basketball coach, and I was an extra, and I was part of a basketball team, actually. That's why we got the jobs, because we were actually basketball players.
Oh.
But Vince Vaughn, they were filming in Toronto. I grew up in Toronto, so they hired I think it was the entire University of Toronto basketball team to also be on Vince Vaughn's team in this game or something like that. And I don't even think I ever saw the movie. But I should check that out. But yeah, but it was amazing with the cameras and the all the extras like cheering and because they had shots of the crowd and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. I always loved it when things went wrong and watching just the endless problem solving of like the director and the ADs and the like just okay, this isn't working. Like we need to totally change this around, put the camera over there, change the lights. Like it was beautiful.
Yeah. No, when you're a director on a movie, you are answering about 100 questions a minute, and that's why you have a first AD and you have a second AD and you have these people that are to help, deal with the questions that don't necessarily have to be answered by the director. Those are very important jobs, and keep making sure that you stay on schedule. Time is money and especially making movies, boy. But again, like I've loved it since the first one, and I will never stop.
How do you think AI is going to change animation? I've heard that people are really working on this, like using AI to like write scenes and then having the AI create the graphics and the pictures and the movement. Like this is a real thing that's happening.
Yeah, the writing part of it scares the crap out of me, honestly. But I mean, I've heard other like writers way more prolific than I am, saying that like there's no way that AI can really embody storytelling the way a human being can.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as far as being able to put pieces of artwork together to create something, I mean, I've seen some things that I thought were very impressive, and I've seen things that looked like shit. And so I guess it's all going to depend on who's doing it. It's still being controlled by a human.
Yeah, and who's making those inputs, right? That's part of the problem, isn't it?
Yeah. So, yeah, honestly, I don't know. It's the wild, wild west right now when it comes to that, and I don't think anybody's really sure, but I still have faith that we as human beings are, the ones that will really make what matters in the end.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like when you think of imagine someone like Seth MacFarlane, right? Brilliant writer, great voice guy, obviously creator of The Family Guy and many other series after that. I can't remember the ones after The Family Guy, but he did Ted, right? Imagine we could be like less than 10 years away from like a 16-year-old Seth MacFarlane doing his own voices in a little home studio like this, and then using AI to animate his story and being able to make a Family Guy-like TV show in his own house.
True. Oh, no. That's possible now.
Yeah, you're right, actually.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
It's an amazing time for young filmmakers, for sure. I mean, AI aside, is that, you no longer need permission to make your movie anymore.
That's the truth. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a wonderful thing, because one thing that I've, learned from the internet is that there are so many creative people out there, that now have the ability to show what they can do, where if they lived in some, flyover state, where, nowhere near Hollywood or New York or whatever, would never be able to show off what they are capable of doing.
North Shore of Long Island.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's fantastic. I know even people are making feature films on their iPhones. I mean, that's crazy, and I think it's cool. I think it's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's great that you don't have to have some studio or some network tell you whether or not you can make your project.
Well, that's what this is.
Yeah.
Sure. I just set up a studio in my own home, and it goes out to the world.
Yeah. So that's the great part of it all.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is the United States is my biggest market for viewership. You know what the second biggest one is? Japan.
Really?
I have no idea what's going on in Japan. I love YouTube and all their statistics. But okay, so you've done it. You've seemed like you've done it all. You're in for someone who's been through as much turmoil and ups and downs as you have in changing careers, going back, writing, animating, everything, you still seem like you've got a smile on your face. You love being creative. If you're on like a 10-year time horizon, not your last 10 years, but just the next 10 years, because you're going to be around making shit forever. I know that. What do you want to be doing for like the next 10 years? Which itch are you going to scratch in your artistic pursuit?
That is a very good question. I kind of playing it day by day at the moment, but I want to. I think I'm pretty much going back to acting again now, because that's the thing that I feel like when I was younger, yes, I would be given these parts and so forth like that, pretty easy. But I looked like everybody else back then. I mean, I looked like anybody on a soap opera back then, you know. And I think that nowadays I've got a lot more character in my face now, and I just recently was in a movie called Mandromeda, where I got to play my age and got to play I played a therapist in that movie, and it was kind of nice to have that old acting feeling back, and I was really enjoying it. And now I've just recently been asked to appear in 2 other movies and a short that I'm going to be shooting next week, actually.
Oh, congratulations!
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I think that for me, probably the one that's going to require the least amount of work for me at this point, now that I'm in my 60s, is to have some fun and do some acting again. Mm-hmm. Maybe be in a monster movie again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't want to blow your mind, but would you ever write yourself your own part and try to sell a script with you in whatever role? Like, have you ever written for yourself in that way, where you've tried to sell a project with you being one of the leads in mind?
I think that, well, the funny thing is that as a screenwriter, I think they're all me. You know what I mean? But yes, like so I like,
it's George Clooney or me, but I wrote it for me, damn it.
But I think that there have been parts that I've written where I thought to myself, if this movie gets made, yes, I would love to play that part. If it almost happened with the vampire movie that was shut down because of COVID. I was going to lobby for a part in that, because I do love the acting too, and so I would probably just concentrate on that for the next few years and see how that goes. Yeah. And if not, pivot.
Yeah. So, are you writing anything at the moment, just like on spec or just for yourself?
I had written some more episodes of Creepshow, but I don't think that we've had 4 seasons. I don't think we have I don't think we're getting a season 5, at least not on Shudder, not on for AMC. Mm-hmm. Unless if Greg finds another network that wants to take it on and continue with it, then fine. Yeah, then I got a bunch of stuff that show him.
Yeah. Well, he should go to Netflix, because obviously in the United States, AMC has their own streaming platform, which is where they show Walking Dead. But internationally, all the AMC stuff is on Netflix, because AMC doesn't have an international presence. And I was living in Dubai during COVID, and I watched every fucking Walking Dead episode. I think I watched it twice, like all 13 seasons or something like that.
Wow.
It's like 130 episodes. I just watched them all. I loved it because you didn't have to think too much, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I'm like, yeah, this is suiting.
I got to go down to the set. I think it was like season 9. I went down and spent a few days on the set of The Walking Dead at their big compound down in Sonoya in Atlanta, and got to watch them, shoot an episode, and it was really fun. It was really fun. They were all great people, mm-hmm. Really great people. Andy Lincoln, who played Rick, was one of the nicest guys I've ever met. He's it's so funny too when after watching him all those years playing a Southern sheriff, and then you meet him in person, and he's got this very sweet British accent, Mm. And Norman's a rock star, Norman Reedus.
Yeah. I love his character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, going down there and being on the set and watching them shoot this really cool scene with walkers falling into this sinkhole and everything, there's a certain thrill and a certain energy and dynamic that I just I would watch I would go there every day if I could.
Yeah, it's a real drug, isn't it? It's a dopamine hit just being around creative people doing things at that level.
Yeah.
Well, look, is there anything you're working on that you want to talk about other than the book? Or
I think just right now, the book just came out, and it's available on Amazon now in paperback and hardcover, and it basically I tell a lot of the stories that I've told here today with you, but it's more than that, because it's really about just how. Well, I'll tell you. When I first started writing it, it was only going to be about those 4 horror movies, right? And because I had been doing live commentary screenings with an audience where they'd show the movie, and as the movies play, I would talk about what it was like making the movie and stuff that happened behind the scenes, right?
Wait. So you got to talk over your own dialogue in your own movie. You got to be the greatest guest at a movie theater ever, right? Because you just get to dialogue and talk, and everyone else wants to hear it.
Yeah, it was great. They were really fun, and then my audience really loved it. And so I thought, well, maybe I should probably put this on paper, So I started that. I started writing that, and I got a publisher interested in it. And then what happened was the book sort of blossomed in both directions, because I thought, well, I'm writing about these 4 movies, but why am I in those movies? How did I get there? What brought me to that point? And then I thought, following that, what did those 4 movies then lead to?
Yeah, because you're a writer.
Yeah. So it turned into a much bigger project than initially intended. But I'm really happy with it. And I think it's really good for people. I tried to make it as easy a read as possible. Also, it's very conversational in its approach, right? So it's not hard to read, and I wanted people to see that working in this industry can be great. It can be crushing. It can be and everything in between, and that it just, if you love it enough, you're going to stick with it.
Mm-hmm. And Michael Caine does the narration of the audiobook.
Oh, I hope so. I would love that.
I think that's really important, though, all jokes aside, is if you love something, you never really work a day in your life. And I think that sticking with the ups and downs and riding it out and doing what you really love, I think that's the key. That's what keeps the dream alive. The moment you stop, the moment you take that job that you're not really excited about, that's full-time, that's when the dream officially is dead. And getting out of that and back into what you love is almost impossible, because then the world just kind of passes you over, doesn't it?
Yeah. I have friends who moved away for various reasons, but have never been able to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's heartbreaking when these were very, very talented people who probably had a lot more to offer.
Mm-hmm.
So until I know that I am done, I'm not going anywhere.
Which will be when you're 6 feet under.
Yeah.
Well, look, thank you, Frank, so much for coming by today. I really appreciate the conversation, the career path, your creative passions is absolutely inspiring, and I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. I loved this. This was a lot of fun.
Excellent. Now we go up here to this, just to show everyone that we're in the same room and we're not doing this by Zoom.
Okay.
Good to meet you, boss.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. We're out.